Hey everybody, this is David Rovix with another another episode of Discussions with David, which comes to you most weekdays at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, here on whatever platform you're watching on, which might be any number of different possible places, but we're broadcasting on the Facebook page of Popular Resistance and the Facebook page of KBOO Community Radio here in Portland, Oregon, and various other places. And it goes out as a podcast afterwards if you look for This Week with David Rovix, wherever you get your podcasts. And I'm very happy to be spending the hour today with Steve Wozniak, who I would introduce to you, but I think we don't need too much of an introduction for Steve Wozniak, I'm pretty sure. And I just want to get into some questions. One random place to begin is actually, I think, a nice one, which is how we first became acquainted on the internet, which had to do with actually a song I wrote about the Kent State Massacre. And I was just thinking about your life and times, and you were 18 in 1968, living in the San Francisco Bay Area. I was just first of all wondering, how do you remember where you were when you first heard about the Kent State Massacre?
I don't remember exactly. It certainly would have been probably my last year of high school or first year of college, somewhere in that time frame. But I don't remember exactly where. There were other major stunning things going on. That was just a bigger shock than the others, and it left a stain. I was forming my personality and my opinions of life and what's right and what's wrong, and it was a major factor in that.
And you must have also been looking at the possibility of deploying to Vietnam around that time as well. I mean, that was you were draft age, very much draft age, huh?
Well, I headed off to college, kind of thinking, I guess I'm a Republican, and then I started reading stuff, and the whole war, the Vietnam War was going on, and it was just one thing after another. It was dishonest. It just wasn't right. It was breaking agreements, and I kind of lost a lot of faith in the government. What happened was, although I was a college student, you could get a deferment from the draft. If you got drafted, you had to go serve, and maybe in Vietnam and dangerous stuff, and so I could file a form, and I didn't file the right form. I just sent my grades into the draft board, and the San Jose draft board voted 5-3 to make me 1A eligible for the draft instead of best a student deferment, and that was kind of a shock that was wrong. But I was going through other changes in my life, inspired by things like Kent State, and I had decided that I was a pacifist. Why would I want to hurt another person, kill another person that has friends, has a family, plays card games, has a life, And decided that I could serve. If I had to serve, they could shoot at me, and I'm fine with that. But I would never shoot somebody back. And unfortunately, that didn't get you excluded from the draft. There was a thing called conscientious objector, which I was inside. But you had to belong to a church. And to me, a church is a lot of people all saying the exact same words. They're all under guide of leader, and they're singing the same songs at the same times. And that's being followers, not leaders. And my mind was different than that, more creative, more leader type mind. So anyway, So I just was a pacifist. I wouldn't shoot. Now, I didn't get qualified as a conscientious objector, but there was a judge in our city, Judge Peckham, I still remember the name, and he had even released another student, a bright science student from my own high school, like a year ahead of me, as being a conscientious objector because of how he felt and thought, not did you belong to a certain church. And so that was my out, but then the draft lottery came. I got number 365 birthdays. I was so far down the list, I'd never get called. So that was fine. Then the Pentagon Papers book came out, and I read that. And I just was so sick at how people have so little. We think, our votes, we have so little control over what goes on in the government. And even elected president sometimes is just sort of secondary. all the people getting riled up, you know, over patriotism, whatever, and what Congress, how it has to go through Congress. And I decided that, you know, a president really doesn't matter. My life is how many things do I have in my home? What kind of life do I have? And it's not going to be affected. So that was when I decided I would never vote. And to this day, I've never voted, well, for any candidate win. I might have popped in a Ralph Nader here and there, or Peace and Freedom, or the Green Party, but so I've never really voted to this day, except this year was the first time I voted ever in my life.
Steve, do you have a headset you could put on by chance? Because I'm getting a lot of distortion coming back, which oddly enough was not happening until we went live. But you don't have a headset handy, do you?
Hold on a second. Let's see if we get in trouble or not.
Maybe that's somebody calling to say you need to have a headset on.
I know this has worked for me in the past. It actually.
I only have technical problems when I'm interviewing someone really famous.
Yes, I don't know if this microphone is going to take over now as I plugged it into the computer. It actually plugs into, you don't hear me yet this way, so let me go back to the mic settings. I got to find them. And the microphone in is now, let's see. Is this working?
That's much better.
Okay.
Better. Yep.
Great. Yeah, I've had good luck with these headsets. I don't wear them that often because they're in a Zoom conference or something. Okay.
Yeah. Great.
That better?
Yeah, that's great. Steve, I was just, reading about your. I mean, I loved your memoir. I was, and then there's. Actually, I don't remember if you said anything like this, but there's various points reading about some of the pranks that you carried out when you were younger, which were really like pretty significant and disruptive to some computer systems. And like, I mean, I just wonder do you ever think about if you were born at a different time, perhaps maybe 20 years later, you could have ended up serving a long prison sentence for the kind of things that you basically got very relatively little punishment for when you were young, like what you did in Colorado, for example?
Pranks and jokes are one thing, but seriously, like disobeying laws, that is not myself, except for I'm in agreement with nonviolent resistance, that sort of thing. So I've never hacked a computer. I've never gone in, tried to take over, almost never. I mean, one person told me once a funny little one-line statement that would cause a certain Hewlett-Packard computer to crash, and I didn't do it, but I told a friend about it, and he did it, and his high school computer went down. But I've almost never done that sort of hacking. I've done pranks that are just funny to watch because a lot of people don't understand what's going on especially in electronics. And they don't understand that somebody could be broadcasting something that's messing up the TV set a little bit. Or I would think of very humorous jokes that are non-destructive, like in the announcements to our high school one time. Since I was president of the electronics club, I knew how the system worked. You wrote an announcement to be read the next day. The vice principal okayed it. They typed it in, and it showed up. And so I made one saying that Stanford's head janitor would speak on higher custodial education in a certain room at a certain time. And it got printed, and the kids would laugh, and the teachers would tell them to, no, this is serious. The plumbers make good money, whatever.
It sounds like something from The Simpsons, that one.
Yeah, but it's kind of clever. And sometimes I try to take my pranks one step further than just the plain prank. Like when I was in my first year college computer class, and a bunch of us saw it on 4 TV sets, closed circuit TVs. And I didn't know if my jammer would work on closed circuit TVs with cable coming. So I built it inside a magic marker, and it would fit in the rings of my binder. And I sat down in class for this. And some of the students saw the professor live, but not most of us. And I turned it on, and the TV above me wasn't jammed that bad. And some of the ones on the right-hand side of the classroom, they were jammed worse. And it the picture a bit. It wasn't like you couldn't watch it. It wasn't like it went black. And 3 TAs stood up in the front of class. I thought we were all students. Uh-oh. And they looked over the class. They said, whoever's got the transmitter, turn it off. I've been a ham radio operator since I was 10, but I'm not going to say, oh, it's me. and then I sat there through class. They're watching us. If I reach over and turn it off, the guy next to me at least will know who did it. And I was all scared. I said, I'll just walk out at the end of class with everyone, and the TVs will go good, and they'll never know who had it. Well, near the end of class, there's a guy under one of the TVs jammed the worst. He's sitting there, and he starts collecting his books a couple minutes early to leave class ahead of everyone else. So as he walked towards the door, I kind of used my thumb, and I made these go in and out, in and out. And then when he walked out the door, the TVs went perfect. The TA pointed at him and said, there he goes. Great. So I like adding that extra touch of like framing someone else. I got two pranks for one.
Excellent. Steve, you mentioned you were a ham radio operator when you were 10, and I was a cellist when I was 9, and the reason was because I was raised by musicians, and I imagine that you're getting yourself on a ham radio at the age of 10 also might have had to do with being raised by an engineer. And do you ever think about that, or not? That's not a. Do you think that didn't have much effect on you as a kid in terms of your interests?
Yes, my engineer father, electrical engineer, had a great effect on me as a kid. Did science fair projects that were electronics. I got into it. I understood it. I liked it. When I had questions of how to go further than I'd ever been taught, he would answer them or pull out a blackboard, show how electrons flowed. But as far as the ham radio, that definitely came from a book I read in 5th grade. I can almost remember the name of the book, but it was about some ham radio operators that solved the kidnapping by their knowledge of radio and electronics. At the end of the book, it said, you can become a ham radio operator. Well, you didn't have to be 16 years old, like, to get a driver's license. I was, 9 or 10, 5th grade. And I sent away for the information. I started studying, and I went to the school safety patrol the next day, and I told the guy next to me on the safety patrol, I'm going to become a ham radio operator. And he says, oh, you're in Mr. Giles's? There was a guy on our block, a ham radio operator on our block, Mr. Giles, and he was actually holding classes for people who wanted to become ham radio operators. And I went there, you learn how to type the telegraph key, Morse code, and you learn a lot of different like legal parts of ham radio, and you learn electronics and circuits, how to build radios and that sort of stuff. So I became one. But as I was doing it, as I was becoming a ham radio operator, my father saw my interest, my parents saw my interest, and for Christmas I got an expensive, in those days, Hallicrafter's transmitter and an expensive Hallicrafter's receiver, where you build all the parts yourself. You solder every resistor and capacitor into place. You spin, you put on the strings to the dials, will tune it. You go up and measure antenna. So I was very advanced in. That gave me a lot of experience in building my own things, and I was still only 10 years old, and my father went with me and got a ham radio operator's license at the same time. But I'd already got well into it.
When you came up with what, like, some of the ideas, like the idea of putting a motherboard and a screen together, and this idea of which now seems so sort of obvious that it just seems like inevitable. But at the time, like with many other discoveries and even just inventions of any kind of creative idea, later it ultimately becomes so it's sort of self-evident. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with steampunk, with this whole genre of fiction that postulates the idea that electricity was never invented, but steam continued to be like the main sort of motivating force in society. And they sort of imagine what the 21st century might have been like with just, run on steam. But I mean, it's kind of silly, but do you think it was inevitable? Sorry?
I got some cool steampunk stuff.
Do you think it was inevitable, or do you think? Do you imagine how things could have gone if you hadn't been around?
No, I think these things would have happened. I was just early, and I was ahead in the game, and there were a lot of reasons why I was ahead in the game. From when I was 10 years old, when I was 13, to when I was 15, to when I was things I did, and I had somehow taught myself how to design computers when you could not buy a book in any bookstore about computers, how they were built. You could not buy it, get any magazines about it. It was just an unknown science. It wasn't in our schools, but I'd fallen in love with it and did it. Not like I think, oh, it'll be a job or it'll be money. It's just something I love learning about, these ones and zeros and digital technology. Not only had I taught myself to design computers, I found a way to get manuals for computers, which describes the architecture of a computer, its inside elements, like where the rooms are in a house, that's architecture, where the windows are and all that. And every time I could get a manual with a description of that, I went back to my elementary school science fair projects with things called little logic gates. I built a huge device with hundreds of transistors that could play tic-tac-toe. I went back to that and I said, what little gates that are now on chips? They were starting to come out with very small chips, could add up to building a computer. And I did this just for fun, and I did it every weekend I had free in my bedroom. I would design one computer after another, all the mini computers coming out from Hewlett-Packard, Varian, Data General, Digital Equipment Corporation, and those sort of. And I would just design their computers on paper. I could never afford a single part to start building them. But sometimes not having any money, no savings accounts, no rich parents or anything, sometimes not having money has benefits you in certain ways, and it benefited me intellectually because I worked over and over. If I designed a computer on paper, I wouldn't say, okay, I've done it, I handed my grade. No. I would say, can I do it better? Is there any way I can do it better? What would better be? If I could save some parts. Look at the newest chips. The fewer parts, the better. So I became very minimalizing. It was a contest with myself. I was in competition, but only with myself. Nobody else did this that I knew. I mean, nobody around would understand a computer drawing on paper at my high school. But eventually I told my father, one beautiful computer came out. Why was it beautiful? Its architecture was very different than the others. It was the Data General Nova. And instead of having one instruction for this and another for that, 54 different instructions, it kind of had one long instruction for all the arithmetic stuff, and 2 bits meant one, 2 of the ones and zeros meant one thing, another, and 3 meant that. When you put it all through, it could do almost everything any of the others did. So the computer was just as good, but it took about half as many chips for the central processing unit, what we now call a microprocessor. Took half as many parts. And oh my gosh, I told my father, someday I'm going to buy a 4K Data General Nova computer. Why 4K? 4K was the minimum that you could type programs in, as I've been lucky to put into once a week. I could go down to a company. My electronics teacher arranged for me to go to a company in Sunnyvale, Sylvania, and I could actually sit down with an engineer and type programs in and run the first programs of my life. This was so exciting, but I wanted where you program in, not where you flip all the switches on a front panel. That's what I was used to. As a matter of fact, 5 years before Apple actually built one of those computers, so I was way ahead of the game when everybody was trying to do it in 1975 and start calling this is how we're going to computers and all this stuff. Well past that. And I wanted to...
Steve, just a moment. Sorry, the echo is getting worse. Do you have a speaker on in your room? Can you turn it off?
Sure. Turn it way down. Okay. That better?
That's still happening, but if you can't hear me through your headphones, can you turn the speaker off completely? Or there's an echo cancellation thing in StreamYard that should be kicking in, but it seems not to.
Okay, I hear you fine.
Oh, much better.
You're much better too. Sorry.
Oh, great. No problem. Wonderful.
You know, those of us who I'll tell you, the people who brought us this digital technology should be executed, but I don't say that anymore.
You don't say like kill your parents either.
I'll tell you what I say now, though. Those who brought us this digital technology should be forced to live with it.
Right.
That was a good example.
Well, we all are forced to live with it now, huh? But
how... I've gone up through a sequence of building one device after another. When I got to wanting a Pong game, I saw it in a bowling alley, wanting to build my own Pong. Yes. I could design it in very few chips. I was so skilled by then. But what do I use for input and output on a computer? The devices were too expensive. You could never afford kind of a monitor or something. Wait a minute. We all have televisions in our home. I was an analog television. I could repair TVs if I'd chosen that as an occupation. I was a television engineer too. So I just unscrewed the plastic off my TV and ran wires to the right places inside and scoped it with an oscilloscope to find the right place for the signals. And I just developed a device that would send in the signals that a TV would interpret as data and put on the screen to build a Pong game. So I already had my output device. TV was the only affordable thing because I owned a TV, so it cost me zero. And input, I saw the early ARPANET. Now we have billions of computers on the internet, but when it started as a funded project of the United States military, a DARPA project, it was called the ARPANET, and it only had 6 computers. 6 computers in the country: MIT, Stanford Research Institute, UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, University of Utah, and one other. And oh my gosh, I wanted to be able to get onto this thing so badly, and I already had output figured out. Use my TV, and now instead of balls and paddles, I'll design it so it prints letters on it. And keyboard to type on. Keyboards now are so cheap, you wouldn't even ask a question. Back then, they cost, maybe 1,000 of today's dollars for a minimal keyboard that didn't even have lowercase characters. And I found a deal in an electronics magazine, EE Times, and ordered a keyboard for $60 back then. That was, 73-ish. So now I had this thing get on the internet. So I was already well along on the way. I now had a keyboard and a video display, and that was the typewriter paradigm. The only thing is, I was talking to a computer in Boston, and the computer in Boston would talk back to my TV. And here came the Homebrew Computer Club and all these enthusiasts. The world's going to change. It's a revolution. We're all going to have computers of our own. We aren't going to be some big company that can afford $1 million computer, and we just have to use their computer. We're going to have our own. I was so inspired by this type of thinking. And I studied the chips. I hadn't really kept up with microprocessors because the early ones were too weak to build a computer that I wanted. And all of a sudden, the first night of the Homebrew Computer Club, I went home with a data sheet and I said, oh my gosh, this microprocessor is what I used to design on paper over and over and over. The heart of a computer, the processor, and the entire formula for a good computer that I could type into and everything popped in my head right then. And there were some other technical issues that I solved ahead of what other people were trying to do. And now eventually I wound up with the exact machine I wanted. I could type things in, see it on the screen. And then I started writing a computer language. I had never even programmed in this language called BASIC. But if computers were going to go into the home, BASIC was going to be the language. The simplest language you could ever imagine to write programs in was going to be right for the home.
BASIC didn't
exist. Oh yeah, no, it had existed my whole life, but I had only programmed in the scientific languages, Fortran, Algol, PL1, these sort of languages, and I didn't want to touch a silly little language like BASIC. I'd barely seen a bit of it. I had to actually, when I decided though that a computer for the home had to run BASIC, that had to be the language. That's the one people were going to go for.
Was BASIC used for the big mainframes, for the big that Army computer?
It would run a lot of those, so yeah, I'm sure it was used for them. But there was a book called 101 Games in BASIC, and Bill Gates wrote a BASIC language for the Intel microprocessor. I had chosen another because I couldn't afford the Intel one. I found a processor for $20 instead of $400 that got introduced, and I wanted to write the first BASIC for it, but I'd never programmed in BASIC. I had to go late at night back to my cubicle at Hewlett-Packard where I designed the scientific calculators, and I opened up a BASIC manual, and I started making notes as to what the language was all through. And I had to actually learn the language in order to write it. But then again, I had never taken a course in writing computer languages. I had sort of seen little references to it in some books. So I had some starting and came up with a very structured approach, and I wrote a whole BASIC. So now I'd go to the club, and I would type in a little program. I'd type in a little program, and people could, enter their name, and it would repeat, hello there, John Smith, hello there, John Smith, 20 times. I would run programs. And everyone was gathered around me because they're looking down at my board that had so few chips on it. I was such a good designer. board is doing input and output. The standard they were used to then was, oh, you buy a kit, it has a board with a processor, and then you have to plug in other boards, like a big, expensive serial cable board that goes to a teletype that costs as much as 2 cars, and then you can type in and see things. And I had so few chips, it was the affordable formula, and what a personal computer could be was shown off every 2 weeks. Computer Club. Steve Jobs wasn't around yet. I passed out my designs to everyone in the club because we are the ones trying to start a revolution. These are people that will look at my designs, get their chips, wire them up, and build their computers, and we'll start moving that way towards real useful computers at an affordable price. And so I gave away my designs for free. I helped some of them actually build it. I would actually go and do soldering and everything to help them build my computer. And then Steve Jobs came into town, and he didn't take me down to the computer club like the Ashton Kutcher movie. I brought him to the club. I've been there every day since he started. He'd never been there. He'd been up in Oregon living on a commune or something. So I took him down, and that's when he saw the interest in the company.
And when you look at, I mean, when you're back then, imagining the future, I mean, it's been a long future since then. That was quite a long time ago now. But how did you imagine things might go? I mean, I'm just thinking of a lot of different factors here. Like, I mean, for one thing, just, you know, I'm a musician. Music is used as a way to torture people on Guantanamo Bay. You know, anthropology has been used to in all kinds of terrible ways to destroy primitive societies. I mean, there's been, you know, everything, any kind of technology, any kind of science can be used in pretty much different ways, you know, for good or ill or in between. And I wonder, as you were thinking about how things might go in the future back then, and as you look around you now, I mean, that's a massive question, and I want to pick that apart into sub questions. But just to start out with a sort of macro view of that whole question of, like, where did you think things were going, and did it turn out anything like what you were thinking with computers?
Let's go back. You're talking to me, and I had no interest. I had decided when I was young that because money corrupts values, I had some very good values that I would not ever want to pursue big riches in life. Only happiness, ways to have smiles, make you smile, and real human life. So I didn't. Oh my gosh, you know, I did believe.
Sorry, the echo is getting worse again, Steve. It's I don't know what's going on with that, but it's getting like I know it'll be fine once it's transcribed, but there's some kind of serious audio. Yeah, it's just bouncing all over the place, like we're in a very echoey room, but not like a normally box.
Yeah, I don't have an explanation for that.
It's like echoing so much it's not even audible.
The microphone.
What about when you go to settings on the screen here and there's audio there's echo cancellation that should be working, but it seems like it's being overridden or something. I don't know.
See. Well, there's cam mic. I can
in there with there now you're muted. But then there's settings.
I've been here, and it's camera correctly, audio,
and then audio, and then echo cancellation.
The microphone is still set to normal there. Hang on.
It's
now all the settings agree.
Much better. Oh God, yes, thank you.
This is
great.
This world. I actually no. I complain about it almost every day a few times. It's just something you did right as a human, and you just couldn't go on. And computers were supposed to be our friends, but let's go back to the very beginning.
Yes,
You're talking to me, and I didn't say, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to start a company, make a lot of money." I had decided. I was reading a magazine article one day, and it was about Sumner Redstone, who ran Viacom, and how he was buying and selling these $50 million companies, huge amount back then. And I thought, would I want to be the person? Or would I rather be the person that just laughed with some friends about a prank I'd pulled? And on the day I die, I'd rather be the one laughing. So came up with my formula: happiness is smiles minus frowns. And that's what life is about. Now, here I have this great computer. I know I'm well ahead of all the others in the world, and maybe 5 years ahead. I figured out how to do color on color television for $0 instead of $5,000. In ways that were not in any engineering book. They were never discussed, that you could just plug a digital number into a TV and it would think it was color by all these complicated mathematical forms of sine waves, where you have to use differential calculus to design it. I was an analog engineer, but this digital solution, that was why our first logo was colors. Now, I explained to you that games were going to be important for computers coming in the home. I realized that because who's going to buy a computer for the home to do the things that computers did? Inventory, sales figures. Nobody does that in their home. You're going to have games, good games. And you could type in these games that were text only, and they type a line of text. You could type back. And those were in the book, 101 Games in Basic. Those were simple games. They were not arcade games. I'd been around the arcade games designing my own. I designed Breakout for Atari. Breakout's a game where you hit the ball against the bricks. And games were a huge part of my life. And my Apple II computer was the first time that games were color. Arcade games were color. Before that, they were black and white only in the arcades. The industry was starting. And it was the first time ever that arcade games were software, meaning a 9-year-old could write a good game with colored things moving on a screen in one day. A 9-year-old could write a game in one day. Before that, it took a skilled engineer like myself hooking over 1,000 wires to over 100 chips, hooking these wires up, getting signals going right, keeping track of your circuit. It would take generally a half a year to a year for an engineer to develop a game prototype. Now it was down to one day. Now that games were software, it was shocking. So I wanted other engineers to see what I had come up with and compliment me as engineers. I've been put in as I'm now an IEEE fellow, and that means so much to me because it's other engineers respected me. That's all I was after. As far as where would the world go, when Steve Jobs and I were kind of talking a little bit about where these go, we just sort of knew we had a product that was in this new market of little personal home computers and that we could sell it. Steve Jobs had been turning my little inventions and designs into money for both of us for 5 years. So that was his role. He wanted money more than me. I had a job as an engineer. He had basically just living on nothing. So that was an advantage of that was he always wanted to turn things into money. And
it's an important combination to the creative and the person that does the marketing. I mean, whether you're talking about any kind of creativity, is
You need business thinking to make money. You need marketing to know what is good and what isn't good and how you should sell it. And you need the engineering, and the engineering turned out to be key. This was a product that came from engineering only before Steve Jobs got involved. But you know what? To Steve Jobs, you had to have a company, selling products, making money, or you don't get money. That's how you're going to, or to become big and important in the world. He had always wanted to be one of these important people, but he didn't have a way to it. Academics, I was the math award winner in my schools and that sort of thing. But Steve didn't have academics or business experience to get him to one of these top positions. But now he was founder of a company that had big money because our third equal, Mike Markkula, had invested in us enough to make 1,000 of these Apple II computers. Steve Jobs' personality was forming around that time, and he decided he was going to present himself to the world as the important thinker in computers. And although he hadn't had anything to do with computer design, but he had to have a company doing this. Now, where did this company was going? Did we have vision to say, oh, everybody's going to be carrying around their library of song music and videos on little tiny chips? And are we going to have computers in our hand that are so powerful? No. As a matter of fact, the amount of memory then that would hold about one song cost close to $1 million. Do you think we ever imagine you're going to have, this little van with 1,000 songs on it? No. We're just going to get started in this industry and take one step at a time and progress and grow with it. And who knows where it goes. We just thought, if you make $1 million, have $1 million company, you're a huge, huge deal. But the whole industry kind of grew because of Moore's Law, so wound up much more significant than. I'm still here, but I lost you. Uh-oh. Says I'm in the show. Everybody can hear me. Well, not sure where David went. Might have taken a break. I was thinking of pulling down my one of my Steamcast masks. Well, hello. Okay. So here we are starting a company. And of course, even when we introduced the Apple II computer, had to play a prank. You can find it in my book, I hope we didn't time out. It says I'm still on. I hope people can hear me, but I have no way to confirm that. So we start Apple, and I made up a brochure for another company, a fake brochure for a fake product that didn't exist. Made it sound so splendid. And I didn't tell Steve Jobs. You don't tell everybody around you when you're doing pranks, or you get caught. I learned that in high school, and only got caught for one thing ever in high school by accident. There you are, back again.
I'm so glad you were able to keep on going.
I've been talking to the audience.
Excellent.
Yes. So here we were introducing the Apple II computer, and I put out thousands of these brochures for another product called the Zaltair. Get my book, I Was, and you'll read more about that. And it was so funny. And even Steve Jobs saw it and said, "Whoa, we didn't do too bad," looking at how we did on the comparison charts compared to this fake product.
Great. This is of all people that I have such technical, I need a new computer basically. So if anybody's watching, this computer I'm using. It's anyway. I don't know why that is so funny to me that this should be.
Let me tell you a story about a computer going bad. Around the time that COVID started, my wife and I had COVID. We had COVID, when we returned from a Southeast Asia cruise on January 4th. And I actually had to give speeches on January 6th at CES in Las Vegas. And we had the worst. We were the sore throat stage, real throat. And then right after January 6th, I did a couple of speeches, dropped others out, told all these people I had nine events coming up that week, and I canceled out of all of them. I knew I was sick, but nobody knew that COVID existed. Coronavirus was not a word in our vocabulary. It was the worst experience of my life. No one should ever get what we had. It was just weeks of trying to breathe. My wife went to the hospital coughing up, said for everything American, and it was nothing known here.
Right. That Las Vegas computer conference, that was legendary. That's where it started here.
And nobody says, well, it sort of gets that. It also started in Silicon Valley, they say, those two places. And I was in both. But so could I have been patient zero in the U.S.? It's not impossible. The more I read about it, our symptoms matched everything. And is you do not want whatever that was. We're very cautious now. We have older relatives, but Janet had it worse than I because she has asthma.
Right. Oh no, that's terrible. And so you've probably had a whole lot of plans change. And have you developed any new habits or new ways that you're spending your time in isolation, or is?
Well, when it finally started getting recognized, I mean, we had it in January. We seemed to be better in February, then it hit us back hard again in March. Okay, and by then it was starting to get recognized in this country that there was a serious disease, that it was a little bit beyond control, and then we got into the shutdown. So it was in April, and when the shutdowns happened, okay, my life was basically giving up to 100 public speeches a year, mostly foreign, constant travel. That was killed. That's dead. And at home, we love to go to movies together. That was out every day to relax at the end of a long day. We like to go to a restaurant and sit down, maybe play a couple of little iPhone games. That was out. And concerts. We go to dozens of concerts a year. We try to go to any little concert. We have to drive an hour and a half to 2 hours to all the concerts we go to because they aren't in San Jose, the bigger city, San Jose, where we live. They're up in San Francisco, and driving there at rush hour. But we love the music so much. You pay $20 sometimes, and three great acts that just build on each other, and your head is in heaven. Well, that's out. So we miss that probably more than anything else. The virtual concerts don't quite do the same.
When you changing the subject just a bit here, I was thinking of festivals that you were involved with quite a while ago, and also just the intersection of music and technology, and the whole question of open source and free and patents and copyrights, and this whole big, I mean, it's a massive can of worms, I know, but I just I just wonder if the whole free festival scene in the Bay Area was much of an influence on your thinking as a designer of other things.
I don't think it was. The counterculture movement was strong, important part of my life. I very much appreciated it and admired it and agreed with it, except I would never do any drugs. I've still never taken an illicit substance. I even turned down Willie Nelson on his bus. But it was this idea of community and thinking about everyone, in a fair, more equal way, and not having these arbitrary rules, even rules on drugs. I never used drugs, but boy, I was never ever against them anywhere I ever was. Alcohol is kind of a bad one. I didn't even have any alcohol till I was 30 and barely drink at all now. So that counterculture movement, yeah, it was a lot about we just share with each other and we're free and we don't have to own things. And that was, I appreciate that, but I don't think it affected my designing. My designing was a skill. I was shy. I was alone. I was in my room alone and just training myself to do these things and get good at them, but no reason and no goal. When I graduated school, I did not think that computer designers were a job that I would ever have, and yet I could design any computer in the world in a couple of days. I thought that when I graduate, I'll be an engineer, and we engineers design analog things, televisions, radios, the old style stuff, radar, whatever, but computers, that's only done in places called research or the mill or something. But so it was very hard to relate. Oh, okay, all this open source movement and thinking. Of course, as I mentioned, I passed out all the designs of my what became the Apple I computer. Didn't have any name or anything, and I passed it out for free because I wanted to just help the world to be able to build this device, to have it. To go through third-party profit-making companies and all that. So I was strongly favored, but I'm not against companies, and I'm certainly, copyrights. There comes into a big issue of copyrights. Well, you can give things away freely if you want to, but if you say, well, you can have this device, but only if you sign an agreement with me. And it's like, how's your word? But the copyrights and patents are just so far extended, like forever with Mickey Mouse and all that. Very much against that. I think maybe patents should let a company get a starting advantage, but only expire after 5 years or something. It's just abused to keep simple concepts that a young person coming up with the right environment around them, including the right resources, the right money, come up with the same idea. These aren't really necessarily brilliant things. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're so far out of the book, but sometimes they're just things anyone would do. And now some company has a patent on it. And so I'm against that. Just makes it harder for other young people who are creative types to get into the business world.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes so much sense, and I've just recently been trying to wrap my head around this whole question, just in terms of like what's been happening over the past, especially like 20, but maybe especially the past 7 years with the music industry sort of collapsing and so big tech companies getting really massive, and this whole question of like where's the money going and who's making any money in this whole, like, I definitely know the musicians mostly are not making the money in here, and then but so many of us were just giving away our music in the first place online that then it just like seemed like almost a natural transition when Spotify started giving it away for us. But then it wasn't. It didn't have the same impact. Like when you're giving it away on yourself, which I was doing also. Like it didn't. It was the whole dynamic changed when Spotify started their free tier. For me, anyway, in 2013, that was like a key year when everything changed for the worse in terms of like the monetary aspect of things. And I attribute that to Spotify's free tier. As far as I can tell, I don't know, it's a big world, so I don't know what all else was going on. And there's a lot of factors, but I just I wonder if you think about the state of the music industry today in light of your views on these kinds of questions. Not that I don't have any answers, and I'm not expecting an answer in particular on this. I'm just wondering if you have any perspective on that.
Yeah, we've sort of moved from, start of personal computers and digital technology into the internet era, which we
I know,
haven't discussed
right?
much.
Which is
But
no, it's a
even,
big shift, right? That's not
and
the same thing, right?
even before the internet era, you owned things. That was one of the differences we were taught was important between us and communism, where you couldn't own property. I think it was sort of made up, but I always thought, my gosh, I love owning things. If I buy a record, it sits on my shelf. I own it. It's always usable. I can protect it, and it's good for 40 years. And but then there was also some big companies like auto companies, say, and they kind of took away a lot of your choice. And to me, choice is the equivalent of wealth. And a lot of it was taken away, and they kind of controlled you, but not much. And governments tried to control you. And here came the internet. I got in early, before almost anyone else, to discover the internet and implement it, because I even got a 3-letter, my name, Woz.com, because nobody was buying names or anything. I didn't have to buy it or anything. It was just available. Woz.com, a 3-letter. But I thought com means commercial. And I'm more of a nonprofit person. I'd set up a lot of museums here in San Jose. They named a street after me. And I was into they were all .orgs, the nonprofits. And I felt I was more of a nonprofit person. So I always use woz.org instead of .com. I still have it. I own it. I control it. So I was in the internet real early. And when I first got on, my gosh, you can be in contact with sources all over the world. And hyperlinks were barely starting, and you could read something and get to somewhere else. It was an amazing experience, but it's like we've broken the bonds. We've been free. We can contact anybody about anything and say anything without governments and big companies deciding what it would be. And the internet is our source of freedom. And a lot of the companies that start up thinking this way. Even Apple. We're giving the world, something to be more free. And in the end, the internet just got used to control us better than before, to watch over us more closely, to, now it's boiling into, instead of one internet worldwide, it's like 200 countries, each with their own internet and controls and all that. So that turned out to be a big loser. I feel guilty about some of these things.
What I mean, when you say, do you have any ideas about how we could change the situation? I mean, people talk about breaking up monopolies. People talk a lot about one thing that is of particular interest to me, because I don't think most people really understand it. And I'm not saying I do, but like people talk a lot in the Congress. They're often talking about Facebook needs to be better at banning different hate groups and this sort of thing. But then when it comes down to it, it's their algorithms for the news feed that promotes conflict and arguments, and because of the way the algorithm is set up. So it seems like the problem is so much bigger than, well, it just seems like something that was free has been sort of taken over but everybody's voluntarily kind of gone along with it. It's sort of like, but I liken it to like the superhighway. If the superhighway is there, you're going to use it. If the music's free on Spotify, you're going to stream it for free. Why would you pay for it? Unless you're some small number of people that thinks about these things. But you know what I'm saying? Like, and then with Facebook, with these algorithms, and YouTube with these algorithms, especially, they just seem to, sometimes they feed people great stuff, but oftentimes they're feeding people things that'll keep them glued to the screen, and what works best for that seems to be a division and conflict.
Yeah, I was a non-social person all my life. I mean, in school, I couldn't talk to people. They thought I was just weird, electronic genius is all I was known as. And so when the social web came, I kind of avoided it. I got email. I have email. I have my list of friends. I send to them. They send to me. We know each other. And unfortunately, email's a lot like phone numbers. If anyone gets your phone number, they could always in the past call you and prank you or whatever. And spamming is the big thing nowadays. We aren't gonna stop a lot of the bad behavior because, okay, let's look at spam that comes to you. Let's just look at plain old school emails. Would it ever just be easy to pass a law and say it's invalid? Probably the laws do exist, but we never ever were allowed to pass a law saying that junk mail couldn't come to your mailbox. real physical paper junk mail. You could never say, don't send anything addressed to resident, don't put it here. You were not allowed to say that. The only way around it is to get a P.O. box. And if those were all of the factors of society led up to those laws in the past, they're going to be held the same for the internet, for email, for, now, of course, text messages and all that. They're going to be allowed, anybody's going to be allowed to basically send you junk. And the trouble is, we're in a capitalist world, and it won't go away. And that means that those who make the most money get to set the rules about making money. They buy their influence into governments, and basically, so it's those big wealthy groups and companies, even Facebook, they get to basically have a say in what the rules are, not you, the person who just wants fairness in life and fair rules and all that. You don't really have a say in it. And, it came to the point with Facebook for a while, I didn't really use it until for about 2 months. I started scrolling through just because I found nice, fancy animal videos, fun animal videos. Get them on TikTok now. But I realized every time I was standing in line at an airport, I was scrolling through Facebook for 5 or 10 minutes. I said, wait, this is a habit. And I'm against addiction. And this is like an addiction. So I dropped my Facebook totally. It just wasn't, the good of it wasn't worth. I had 5,000 Facebook friends. I didn't know them, So it's not like people that are close to me trying to contact me, people I've had relationships with. So I dropped my Facebook, and I said, it's okay for good people. If people like it, it's fine. But if somebody's in my category and doesn't like it, that's fine too. It's not making a point. Everyone should drop it. I don't like to criticize others who are different. That's the biggest problem we have in society is you always say, you form sides. My school, right or wrong. It starts that early. Your team in school, my team, right or wrong. You're just going to support it whether it is right or wrong. Now, my country, right or wrong, is what it leads to. And it's just like you don't like people who are different than you. If you speak differently, if you have a different occupation, if you're in a different category of life, you think different politically, you think different socially, you have a different skin color, any of that stuff. If you're different than me, you must be bad. I have to be against you. We learned this too early, and I went totally the other way. Everybody in the world should be equal, and respected. And I don't care, your ethnicity, any of that stuff. It's more like we should all be one. We should all be equal, and it shouldn't be holding especially our monetary capitalist control over everyone in the world. No, we should live like one society. We often say, oh, I don't want to buy a product made in another country. Wait a minute, but look at our states. Our 50 states are like 50 countries. And you say, I don't want to buy another product because it's made in Iowa. I'm sorry, I only want California things. That would be, we don't think that way, and you just have to open yourself up a little bit to accept the world as we're all in it for each other, and we should work together and be cooperative. And most people tend to be competitive. It just seems to be part of the human nature. But most people just want to create demons to fight because it makes them feel that I'm a good person if I'm fighting something demon, something bad, even if it isn't bad, but I call it bad just because it's different than myself.
So nuanced thinking is a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. And having a black and white orientation towards everything is, I mean,
absolutism. Yeah. I decided when I was young, I just want to be in the middle in every way I can. I don't want to be rich or wealthy, which is why I gave away my riches. But I don't want to be extremism on the political sides taught when I was young and how they come around. They're kind of equal. And like the arch libertarian type thinking. No, I don't want to be there. I just want to have some average, normal down the middle of the street. I can talk to anybody on the street. I can go to any, I can go to a cheap restaurant or an expensive. I don't have to be in a class. But anyway, that's how I think, and I have my whole life. This like since Apple, post Apple, current stuff thinking. This has been, I set my, I thought out who I want to be and how I want to act in life and what I want to value. I thought it out when I was about 20 years old, 17, last year of high school, on through maybe about 21 years old. Just did a lot of thinking. What is it? How do you be right in the world and be liked by people and do good? And I luckily, I hit the formulas to keep me happy. I didn't need any Apple computer. I didn't, I just needed a job that puts me in the middle somewhere. And So I'm kind of rare for somebody who's had a big corporate success and acknowledgement. Generally, once you have a big success, you say, "Oh, I want to turn that money into more wealth, and I want to turn it into more power." And you can actually survive at the top if you're a good power fighter and taking that position. You can survive a lot at the top, actually creating nothing new or good that's successful.
And there's so many people I've noticed who, no matter how successful they get, including musicians with #1 hits, no matter how many #1 hits they get, they never feel like they've achieved what they were, they always need another one. They never feel like, I've really achieved something in life. Now I can just kind of relax a little bit and enjoy it. It depends on there's different personality types with that. And yeah.
Well, for musicians, though, it varies like it does for any category, because I started the big amphitheater in Silicon Valley with Bill Graham. We were equal partners. Shoreline Amphitheater. Went to every show in my box for 27 years. So all the biggest groups. Rarely used my all access pass to meet any, or only the small ones. I'd be too scared to go up to a lot of the top musicians. Are like gods to me. I mean, I've been in the same room with Springsteen and Dylan, too scared to approach them and talk to them, even when I was told I should. But then now, over 10 years ago, I got in the mindset, I just want to go to the little small places, where it's intimate, and you see people that are maybe, they can mouth the songs at big concerts too, big festivals, and that's big part of their life is being formed by those words. But you can see people that are embracing and hugging. The music has special drops of magic coming into their life, and I like seeing that. And then, so my wife and I, we finally started to groups would hear we were in the audience, and they'd meet us afterwards. So we met a lot of these young performers, the ones that travel around in a van, that make not enough money for anything, but they have some great songs. And so we started becoming a lot of them. And they are not that way. They'll laugh and they'll humor us, and they're not just looking to overturn the next thing. I mean, if you get high up, once they start getting up, we've met a few that went way up the ladder. Heck, we saw Lana Del Rey. We actually met her for half an hour and then watched her perform at a record store in San Francisco, Amoeba Records. Just a tiny little thing, maybe 30 people there. Some of these go way to the top, and I could name a few others. And you know what? The trouble is, you get into where you just have to live at the business level of having your van and all that. And nobody's pursuing a lower level necessarily. Although we have a very, very good friends with Jewel. We participate in her charities a lot. And matter of fact, my 70th birthday was all a big, huge online thing with lots of famous musicians. And it was to benefit her. I think we benefited to, I'm trying to think, it was $425,000. I think we raised for a charity she has, which is to find youth that's at risk and help them get some life that they would have deserved. And one of the youth that put together that whole 70th birthday festival that went for hours on different days for me. We auctioned a lot of stuff. She had actually been gotten into Stanford, probably because she was part of this group that is out there to help people like herself that got left behind in society in ways. And she couldn't get into any other college, but I feel so good about that. So Jewel, so that's a case where Jewel, she's come back and just done simple little children's songs or whatever. Luckily she's in a position where, like myself, she can do what she wants and doesn't have to pursue this big, huge, magnificent, only going after the bigger hits and being someone else. Not really a competitive attitude, more one just of trying to create good content of what they're good at, to use their creativity.
Can you say something about the relationship between science fiction, or just fiction generally, and the creative process for you? Like, I know that Star Trek had an impact on you early on in life, and or maybe not that early, but you were already an adult when Star Trek came around. But does this kind of visioning of possible futures been helpful for you?
Totally. Although I think almost everyone likes books and likes fiction and likes science fiction. Maybe certain elements of it are better than others. But to me, science fiction was always a world where more things than you imagined were possible. just physically, that we're impossible, come to reality and come to be in science fiction. And sometimes those devices, given a different environment, technology has proceeded, we have microprocessors and all, they become possible to actually create and build, Dick Tracy action. Science fiction, I think, it's an inspiration. Inside, you have this feeling that there are other things out there, and you want to be creative. We're born creative, but a lot of times school tells us, no, you can't look in that drawer. There's a class of 30 people. No, you can't do this, can't do that. You have to have all these little rules, and you're going to get taught to just follow the maze according to path, and not to get outside it too often. So school sometimes diminishes the natural curiosity. I want to see this. I want to explore that. How does this work? A lot of the questions. And maybe someday that'll change. I mean, I hope someday even the internet gets a second internet that's free. The governments will ban it right away, but a second internet that is based on different principles of safety and security and knowing who everything is right from the bottom. So you can't have all the spam and all the ripoffs and all that. That could be done. And people like Tim Berners-Lee are working on, our approaches to a new second internet too. But
then what do you do about the big the companies that have so much money to put into the best designed websites that attract all the people to them, and then they can, after they attract everybody, then they can turn it into a big monetized thing, and they control the platforms. Like, what do you do about that with a free internet? It's sort of, it seems to me like politically the same kind of quandary with libertarianism. Like, what do you do about those entities that don't want to play along with the free idea?
I don't know. I don't have any good answers to that. But if this internet too were sort of like the start of our own internet, I could go on and maybe one of my kids has to do a report on sharks, and I could go on the internet, sharks. And there's a guy who's an academic in a university publishing all this long, it could be a book on sharks, but he didn't have to go through that third-party profit-making bookseller. Right. And so maybe we can get down to some of that and have an alternate internet for those who want it. It's kind of like, how do you introduce competition? I mean, in the case of companies like Facebook, you get trapped. You get trapped very much. And competition would be if they were just required to allow competition, exporting one file that has all your timelines, your history, your friends, and if you pop it into a new competitor, any of your friends that come over that new competitor, you're all in with the same looks and the same sort of things. Then you'd have competition, and Facebook would have to be better to compete. But I wish that's the sort of, sometimes people think inflation is against freedom. That's ridiculous. Look at the first 10 amendments. Every one of them is regulation of the government. The government will not pass a law that does this or that. It's basically, regulation is prevent people from doing bad things, that kind of relationship. Companies shouldn't be doing bad things, and using your data without your knowledge in ways that you wouldn't approve of. I believe that the consumer is more important than any publisher, any publisher or any big company. The one who buys, the low-level person, is the one who should have the decisions as to what's right and what's wrong, and how you should. And if I believe that something is going on behind the scenes, I'm typing in, this is a private message to my wife, I'm sorry. Or if I say I like something my wife posted, that like never gets her. It just goes to tens of thousands of advertisers and advertisements. That's not what I have in my head. What I have in my head should be the most important thing as to what's really happening and going on. It doesn't mean somebody can't use some of my data and make profit on it, but it should be definitely with my full knowledge at the time, piece by piece.
So you would be a supporter of the recent European laws on privacy, internet privacy, and that sort of thing. I mean, I don't know all the details, totally. But it sounds, yeah. And the idea of basically regulating, sort of like being able to export data like you're describing. I mean, it sounds like what I don't know, this is a very loaded phrase, but it sounds like what some people talk about as regulating entities like Facebook as a utility.
All the laws and the politics behind types of regulation, I'm not up on.
Right.
But
right.
But I know there's bad behavior. Some parts of society have to have ways of slapping it, just saying you don't do this bad behavior, and you are open. You don't just say you're open and then hide it secretly and figure out ways around the system. Loopholes. I'm all against that, but everyone is.
Right. There's except for maybe the ones who don't want the regulation to, because it would hurt their MO. But
well, yeah, it's all boils down. You know, you look at, oh my gosh, they're doing it for money, but the trouble is these are public companies usually. Public companies mean who own the company. Millions of people could possibly have invested and have stock. And all of them, you have to be responsible to all of them. And they're not going to say, oh, we want you to be the good guy on the block. We only want you to make us the most money. That's the only thinking. They're not even connected to the product and what's good about it and what it does for people. They just want the money in the end. So that's the problem. You got a board of directors, and they're selected by the shareholders. And so there's no easy way around it. You can't really look at one person, even a Mark Zuckerberg necessarily, although he sort of is the owner. But look at another example. Look at Apple. And you can't just look at one person and say they're in control. They have to be in control in ways that will only make money for the shareholders.
Yeah,
that don't care about even privacy necessarily. But one thing you can do for privacy, I mean, Mark Zuckerberg, I saw him testifying before Congress saying, "Oh yeah, but Apple is so expensive." Oh, wait a minute. All this privacy in your sharing of your photos, privacy in sharing your communication, Apple gives it to you cloud, and it's only $2 a month. So Facebook, give me an option. Let me pay to have, my data is my data and not yours. Give me a price and I'll pay it.
Right.
Well, if the price turns out to be $100 a month, Facebook would be acknowledging your data that you give us is worth a huge amount of money that you're not getting.
Yeah. Right. Steve, I have a zillion other questions, but I've taken up more than an hour of your time, and I really appreciate your being willing to be on my show for the hour. Thank you. And sorry about the technical issues for the first half hour.
We'll do that again. We'll
I'd
do it again and
again.
make up for it. I find that every time I go on a new public video system, and I've been on so many of them, there's always these kind of issues. Oh, getting especially the sound and camera right. And who knows? This time I turned to the correct microphone on my computer, but now I had to go into this app and also tell the app to use the correct microphone to get rid of all that. That's why I say the people who brought us this digital world should be forced to live in it.
Those are exactly the sorts of problems that I'm always having with computers, but it's so nice that Steve Wozniak has the same problems.
We all do. I know that. And many I can't solve when you think there's a technical solution. And my brightest technical friends can't solve it, or don't even know that you have a little feature available on your phone, and then you discover it. Oh my gosh, this is so great! Or I know that it existed even. That's why it's almost you get more info, from these guys on YouTube and TikTok sharing all their little secrets of how to use your tech products.
Yeah, right. That's where we find out these things. Look for the video.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Good day,
Talk
David.
to you again. Yeah.
Thanks. Good. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Steve. Take care. And thanks everybody for tuning into this discussion with Steve Wozniak. You can sorry about all the technical problems, but if afterwards it might work better because of the processing that kicks in when it goes later, but I'll see what I can do to clean that up for archived versions of it. But the current version can be found on the various platforms such as the Facebook page of Popular Resistance, Cable Community Radio, and my YouTube channel. If you look for the Discussions with David playlist at youtube.com/drovics, and in audio form, if you look for the podcast This Week with David Rovics, wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to help me get a new computer and record an album again one of these days that with the actual budget, then please feel free to go to patreon.com/David Rovics and become a patron of the arts, because Spotify isn't. And thank you all so much for listening. And remember, mutual aid will get us through. Trust your neighbors. Don't pay the rent. Take care. Bye for now.